welcome to the National Sporting Library and Museum. We're really excited today to have Tucker Smith here for our gallery talk. And we're starting in the library this morning with some sketches, and I'm going to turn it over to Tucker to talk about his artwork, and then we'll head over to the museum after we look at the interior here. You want to take it over, Tucker?
Yes. Thank you. And I'm so honored and pleased to be here at the National Sporting Library and Museum. This is a great opportunity to have my work together. Today we're going to walk through the exhibit. We're going to start with pencil sketches. That is how I start every piece of work. It's where I do my thinking and planning for the paintings. These are some examples of pencil sketches. They're not finished drawings, they're working drawings. They're how I think to put together a composition that will eventually be a painting.
They're so rhythmic.
As you see, none of them are finished, except the cat over here was a finished drawing. The reason I start this way is that it's easy to scrap one of these and start over, changing the design, changing the figures in it, because I don't have much invested in these. So I try to have it pretty well worked out by the time I go to a painting. When I go to a painting, many times I go to a study, which we will see in the gallery. Is there any questions about the?
Tucker, some of your friends like Tom Lovell would do a full-size drawing composition in pencil before they go to an oil like Return to Summer. Did you do full-size drawing for your major work?
No, I don't. I get it in a small scale. And as you probably know, things change when you change dimensions. So it's a good idea to do that, but I don't take that step.
Tucker, have you always done your art this way, started small and then scaled up?
I have. In fact, if you'll look up here at one of the drawings here, you may recognize the building and the dog because
Oh, good gosh. Yeah,
that was done in Montana.
I love that.
That's circa 1972.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Great painting.
Yes. So yes, I've always worked that way.
Fantastic.
These little elk at the top of the painting were elk studies for my big refuge painting that we will see in the gallery.
Do you ever turn some of these sketches into lithographs or into? Do you ever turn some of these sketches into lithographs or into etchings?
I have done a few. Yes.
Because they're very similar to some etching-like qualities.
Wonderful.
Well, should we go over to the museum?
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tucker.
No, just yeah. There's a lot to see.
Yes,
There are
yes,
86
okay.
paintings in the exhibition, so we've got to.
I love the virtual. That was wonderful.
Does anybody see the virtual? After you know, virtual.
Oh, it's online.
Yeah.
Oh, neat. I'll have to go take a look.
Yeah, it was fat.
When was that?
Okay, very well. And if you don't have it, I know they sent it to me. Yeah, it's available. So you
Yeah.
just have to-
Okay, very good. I got something. Go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
This is
You
a,
can make a career of that.
this is a, this is a beautiful museum. The exhibit is hung in chronological order, basically. I started painting in 1971. And the first painting in this show, the oldest painting in the show, was 1976. I was a computer programmer and analyst before I started painting, but I always knew I was going to be an artist. It was just part of me. We'll, we'll start with the first painting. Excuse me. I was, this was about the first painting that people took note of mine. I was driving down a back road in western Montana, and I saw the rancher out feeding his cattle with his team of horses in the middle of nowhere, and noticed by the decoration on the harness and the tassels on the bridle that this rancher took pride in his horses. And so he took pride in his work. And that's what this painting is about. He took a mundane chore and made it into something to respect. And so this painting is all about the importance of pride. The next painting is one of our dogs and one of the outbuildings on our place in Montana when we lived there. You'll notice the style that I was painting at that time is much, they call it tighter, more detail. But I was painting the only way I knew how. It is more difficult to paint in a confident, accurate manner than it is to paint every detail. If you can suggest the detail, that's actually more difficult. And you'll see as we go, my style loosened up. I don't know if I ever got better, but it changed. And that's because I've gained confidence.
Were there any artists that were inspiration to you? Were there some artists that were particular inspiration to you?
Oh, many.
Which ones?
The top one, of course, is Sargent
Yeah.
and Soroya.
You're blues.
and of course Rungius, but there are so many. There were no art classes in my high school or the small school in Pinedale, Wyoming. And, but I minored in art at the University of Wyoming. That was basically, it was all modern art. It was
Right. during
a lot
in
of
art school in the
abstract
70s, yeah.
at that time, especially. So I didn't learn the craft as well as I would have liked to. But fortunately, there were a lot of good books with good reproductions. And so I studied the books and met a bunch of good artists, and we would paint together and we would learn from each other. So I can't say I was self-taught because it was a group effort. And basically that's, I would have loved to have gone to a good art school, especially
70s, it was
one
all
for
art.
illustration.
You had it.
But especially back then, there just wasn't available.
Tucker, what age was this painting? What era? What year was this painting with the dog done? When did you do that?
It's
70s?
70, 77.
77.
So it was a year after the first one. These are some of our travels. Southport Harbor, Connecticut, Carmel Mission in California, the Alhambra in Spain. I'm known as a wildlife artist, but as you'll see, I paint many more things than just wildlife.
You're incredible capturing the correct light, like in Connecticut, different lights.
Well, thank you. This painting I put in because when I start a painting, I have to decide, is the figure in it, is it going to be about the figure, the wildlife or whatever, or is it going to be a landscape with the figure in it? And this obviously is a landscape with a figure in it. This painting, for some reason, just compositionally all came together. And so I'm fond of this old painting. Another thing, when we brought all the paintings together for the retrospective, I hadn't seen many of them for 40 years. And so they were like almost like seeing someone else's work. I had forgotten the process that I had to go through to make it so I could look at them much more objectively. These are studies. These are field studies. The top one I actually did in the studio. The other two were done in the field. And this is how I gather information. When I start a field study, with things that we'll be doing this afternoon, I don't start with the idea that I'm going to come out with a painting. I'm there to gather information because that's the best source is when you're looking at nature. So if I get the correct light, the correct values, light and dark values, I'm pleased. Sometimes as this middle one, it does turn out to be a completed painting. But you'll notice the difference in style between this and the first paintings we were looking at. Partly because it is a study and there's such a limited time that you can't spend on detail. I'd like to bring up another thing. On this painting and this painting were done on the same trip. I take week-long trips into the mountains every year on horseback. Bill Kerr, the principal founder of the National Museum of Wildlife Art, went with us on this trip. It was 1988. He and I were looking for locations where Carl Rungus, the premier wildlife artist of the world, and I have a photo of Bill watching me paint this one, and this one was from our camp, looking downstream at the lake below us. This was a ranch scene, a branding. It was a fall branding. When normally in the West, when we brand in the spring and the calves are small and they rope them and drag them to the branding area. In the fall, the calves have grown. And so they're very hard to wrestle down. So they run them through chutes. And this is a typical fall branding. The spring brandings, all the neighbors come in and the community, it's a big party, a lot of beer. But in the fall, at this ranch anyway, strictly working cowboys. Someone asked me, why do when I paint people, I paint so many of them from the rear? And I hadn't thought of it when he asked, but part of the reason is when I paint somebody, I want to paint them doing something. And if they're doing something, a lot of the time they're going to have their back to you. And that's just the way it turns out. This is a big ranch and the big hole in southwest Montana. We had about 1,000 head of cattle that morning to brand. This is an example of a field study, but a normal field study for me. I was going to breakfast one morning. I saw this scene and knew that I had to paint it. So I skipped breakfast. Luckily, Jean saved some for me. But so that gives me the information, gives me the light and dark values, get the color that I'm seeing. And then back in the studio, I produced this painting, the finished painting, using the study, plus photos. Thank you. These are some small paintings. They're not field studies. They are studies, but the top one I had in 1888. I had a chance to go to the Kentucky Derby, and I was staying on a horse farm in Lexington for a week painting, and they gave me a horseman's pass, which I don't think at the time I realized what an opportunity that was, because it allowed me to go anywhere on the grounds, including the track. So I was actually on the track, and this is the post parade for the Kentucky Derby. This is the lead outrider. What I wanted to paint here was the tradition and ceremonial aspects that are so important to the Derby. The Kentucky Derby is not just all about the race. And that's what I was trying to paint. I was in this position also when the race was running, and I got them coming around the corner and thought, that's the painting I'm going to do, but I wanted to do the post parade instead. At the time, I didn't feel confident enough to do that painting in a large version, and had always wished that I had, but painting 10,000 people, I was not very confident. So this last year, when I saw this, when we gathered the pennies, I decided, well, yeah, I can do a larger version of that. And I did. It's upstairs. It's the last painting in the exhibit.
Do you typically paint on linen or canvas panels, or stretched canvas?
Canvas. Canvas mounted on board.
He's the only one authorized to do that.
No, I didn't do that.
He's still got the horseman's pass.
Yeah.
No, I don't. Wish I did.
Yeah.
I'd take much better advantage of it. This painting was done in '87. At that time, it seemed, and this goes on all the time, but it seemed like about then, a lot of farms and ranches were having a generational turnover, and the next generation was not interested in staying on the farm or ranch, or there's a lot of closures back then. And when the farm is sold, they typically have an auction then, a farm auction, ranch auction, to sell the equipment, personal items, household items. And it's a sad time, but actually for the community, they look forward to it as a community get together. They normally serve a small lunch or something, and it's a get together, and then plus they might pick up an item that they need or want. And that's what I'm painting here. Notice that all the forest lines in the painting lead to the auctioneer. But it was too much force going to the auctioneer. So I turned this person's head, and notice how much difference that makes to slow your eye down and make it a more balanced look. But you'll see how everything works into the focal point, the auctioneer. this, another painting where I'm doing the back, a lot of people. Again, I wish this were a larger painting, but at the time I didn't have it confidence. Don here remembers that painting because it was in an early Frida West show.
There's a lot of sentiment and stuff like that because some of the, you know, that some families would show up and pay too much for a mundane thing so that the family could have more money. It was having to leave their farm, you know?
Yes.
Wow. We live in a great community. We're in you know, converges to help. I mean, it's a really,
We have to.
it really is. I've never lived in a community like this.
These are some small early paintings, and I'm starting to get a little, even though they're small, there's more confidence in my painting. This painting here is, the location is about 2 miles south of our place on the Hoback Rim in Wyoming. It's looking at the Wyoming range, and that's the title of it. We have a lot of antelope in the summer on our place, and when we bought our place in Montana or Wyoming in 1993, this was the northwest corner. We have about 400 acres on the Hoback Rim, and the wildflowers in the early summer just are wonderful. And so I did a painting of that in the aspen and called it Jane's Garden.
Jane's Garden. Is that your wife?
I need to talk about. This painting of a railroad engine was the only train painting that I got for the retrospective. The Greenwich Workshop publishing house asked me if I would do some train paintings, and I immediately said no. Because I don't do commissions, and I've never done commercial artwork really. But I got to thinking about it, and my grandfather was a conductor on the Great Northern for many years, and so I was close to railroads. And growing up, I had a model railroad. I loved trains. I loved steam engines. They were like they had a life. They were like an animal almost, because you see them breathing and moving, and you see the moving parts. So I told him, okay, I would. And I did about 6 or maybe a little more train paintings, not continually, but here and there. All of a sudden, I became labeled as a train painter.
I can see that.
So I haven't done a train painting since then. But I did enjoy painting them. This is a this engine still exists. It's in the roundhouse in Cheyenne, Wyoming. They took it out for me and ran it over to Laramie and back so I could get photos of it.
Oh, wow, that's
But
I love the hot yellow seal behind.
The-
yeah.
the difficult part was it to me was a side view of the engine and try to make a composition work. Because you got this straight line going across. But by gradually bringing the mountains down to it, the smoke going up, the hills rolling in, it might not be perfect, but I think it worked.
But you get a feeling of the clouds are moving. Also, I mean, there are a lot of clouds that, to me,
Yes.
the clouds are also moving.
Yes, they are.
I mean, they're moving towards us.
Yes. Now we'll turn around. When they were building the new National Museum of Wildlife Art in Jackson, Wyoming, Bill Kerr, the founder, asked me if I would do a painting of the Elk Refuge that was across the street from and his only stipulation was that it be a big painting. And so this is what I came up with. The bull elk are all here in front. And that's because that's how it is. For some reason, in the winter, the bull elk congregate close to the road and the cows are off in the background. Again, the problem was composition, a shape like this. But the hills worked out. So everything in this painting works towards the elk. And
Tucker, would you like to share the story about how the painting got to the museum? Would you like to share the story about how the painting got to the
oh
museum?
yes, yeah. Well, you might imagine that I had a lot of pressure getting this painting done. It was we had just moved up to the rim in Wyoming and my new studio, and this is about the first painting that I did in the new studio. But I finally got it done and framed the day before the opening, grand opening of the museum. And of course, it was too large to put in our Suburban, so I hauled it in our 4-horse trailer. So I delivered to the museum, and I did clean the manure out of it first. But
What are the footsteps? I can't see that closely. Are those footsteps in the beginning here?
yes, yeah, there's tracks.
What are they, animal or human?
That it's where the elk are grazing out there, and they will dig through
Stamping
the
it down.
snow.
Yeah,
And so I use that as a lead in.
yeah. The walkway.
But except for the elk and the brush, this painting is all different shades of blue. It's
I was gonna ask you, which colors did you use? It's a fairly limited palette.
Yes.
And I was wondering which pigments you used for this painting, if you remember.
I use I guess my predominant blue is ultramarine. I use cobalt, not as much as ultramarine, and cerulean. Those are the blues I use.
And you get all three.
And then, yes, they all would be in there. And plus, I will mix some raw sienna in it to tone it down, or burnt sienna if I want it to go more gray, a warm gray. But
What whites do you use? Do you use titanium or your whites? Do you use like titanium flake?
I do use titanium. I use Holbein brand titanium. I also use lead white. I use it more sparingly, but I love the consistency of lead white, especially the long for the stringy. Sargent, when he was using lead white, just did some marvelous things. They're so viscous, and you can't do that with titanium. It's a shorter paint. This painting I did in 1990 and put it in what was then the National Academy of Western Art show at the Cowboy Museum in Oklahoma City. And they chose it as the Prix de West winner that year. It's a purchase award. So this hangs at the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum. It's another one of my, as the last painting was, another one of my landmark paintings that was recognized, and it's a lot of people, it's their favorite painting in this.
You ready to head upstairs? Are you ready to head upstairs?
I wanted to just
You
hit
have-
on this painting, and then we will go upstairs. This painting was from that same pack trip that Bill Kerr was on, and he owns this painting, and it hangs in the office of Dr. Byron Price, who is the guest curator of this show, exhibit. But the design is obvious.
Tell me about the rock in the foreground.
Yes, an important item.
Yes.
That's important. That's a lead in.
Yes, it is.
And so it gives you a way to get into the painting.
Yes, and get out up top.
Right. And then it leads
Yep,
you on
yep,
through.
yep, yep. Brilliant.
This, the fellow leading the string of horses, they're taking the animals out that are pack animals and riding animals to graze in the evening. They'll let them graze for a while till they get full, and then they bring them all in and tie them up because they don't want to lose them. But the fellow in the lead is Irv Lozier, who is the grandson of the outfitter that took Carl Rungus into this country in the late 1890s and early 1900s. And one of the reasons we went with him, because he knew the places where Rungus camped. So I think we can proceed upstairs now.
Tracing the history of Western art.
Very good.
Just
Just go ahead. Yep.
This is such a beautiful museum. I'm so grateful to, and honored to be displaying here. It's just a wonderful, and it's hung so nicely. It has an intimate feel where large galleries are nice, but they have a different feel. Let's talk about these paintings. This is putting up hay in the summer in Wyoming. It's the way it used to be done. There's still at least this one ranch that still does use horses. When I was young growing up, I worked on ranches driving horses. This is called a beaver slide made of poles, and the hay is brought in and then pushed up the beaver slide with a plunger that isn't in either of these paintings, so they can build a stack. These are both evening paintings, and I mean like 8 o'clock in the evening, and they're making hay while the sun shines, and that's literally what they're doing. As long as the sun is shining, they're going to be working in the field. They have a short window to get the hay up. But I love the old draft horses. This painting is called Monty's Shortcut. It's on one of our pack trips. The old outfitter, Monty Skinner, this was his last summer pack trip. He did the hunting the following fall, but after that he retired, and they sold the outfit. But this was his shortcut. It was supposed to save us a lot of time. First of all, he had a hard time finding it. And then when we did get there, you can see coming through these rocks is really tough on the horses and mules. I was kind of in the lead and came down off the hill and turned around and saw this scene and knew that had to be a painting. So being in the lead, I was the one that picked the way through the rocks, and it was difficult. I got down, and the mules following me, picked a much easier way through the rocks. They intuitively knew more than I did. But this, of course, is all about composition. The sky is an important part of the painting. This painting hangs on our fireplace at home.
Would you say these are maybe rain clouds or thunder clouds coming up where it's darker, the gray? It just seems as if the clouds are moving.
That's what it's supposed to do. Yes, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, I wanted that feel.
So you've got movement coming down and movement going up.
Exactly.
Wow.
And the rocks are all formed, so they work with the painting too. But you don't want to make it too obvious. If you overdo it, then that's all you see is the design. You may enjoy the design and say, oh, wow, that's powerful design, but it might be too powerful. On our pack trips, the weather isn't always great. This particular pack trip, it rained a lot, and so I did a painting of the rain and the reflection of the horses in the pond. How we doing?
We got about 15 minutes till questions. We have about 15 minutes until questions.
Okay, we'll speed up. This painting is about 2 miles from our house also. And typical fall scene in Wyoming. It's the time when the bull elk gather their herds. It's called the rut. The painting is called The Season, but of course it's all about colors and shapes. I want to do this one then. I do a lot of Western cattle and cowboy paintings. This is the only one that made it in the retrospective exhibit. So I was glad that we were able to get this one. At the time I did this, Hereford cows were very popular. Angus were coming in, so there was mixture of blacks. Nowadays, if I went up there and saw this scene, these would all be black cows. You wouldn't see a red cow. So I'm glad I did it when I did.
I have a friend in Quebec, Maine. Her name is Sharon Yates, and she's a well-known painter. And she paints a lot of cows. And she said that they didn't have, she actually had to purchase a few cows from a farmer because all the cows were the same, and she wanted some different ones.
That's right.
I just heard that.
That's right. For an artist, that's important. This painting is owned by the National Autry Center, the Autry Museum of Art in Los Angeles. It's called Wyoming Sky. Because of the altitude, our home on the Hoback Rim is at 8,000 feet. Because of the altitude, we have our clouds are really spectacular. And often we get this type of sky. And Gene calls this Wyoming Sky. And so that was the title of the painting. Again, the composition on this one is all done in the clouds. The antelope were put at the bottom but the clouds form the composition. This painting is from Canada, up in the Canadian ice fields. It's Mount Athabasca in the background. Ralph Oberg, another wildlife artist, and I climbed up to find sheep, and we did find the sheep there. It was a lousy day. It was spitting snow and rain, cold. The sun broke out and hit Mount Athabasca, and I knew right then that was going to be the painting. But the challenge was the value of the clouds in shadow was the same as the snow. So the challenge was describing the mountain with the two close values. But it worked because I could have lost edges easily, but hopefully you can still see the side of the mountain. Couple paintings here that I'd like to show. There's something about a campfire that just draws your attention more than the heat and the light. If there's a campfire going, you look at the campfire. And that's what I tried to paint here, was the attraction of a campfire. Then I took that scene and made a larger painting of the same subject, but put people in it. And it immediately changes your focal point. Your eye immediately goes to the people, just because they're people. Still got the fire, still got the tent, but it's interesting how the subject matter can change your whole point of interest. This painting is in the southern end of Yellowstone Park, Moose Falls. It's rarely visited. It's fairly close to the road, but not too many people know it's there. So, and I had a friend, collector, who it was his favorite spot in the park. He wanted me to do a painting of it. We went up there September day, and again, it was spitting snow and cold. Again, the sun broke out for just a few minutes, but enough for me to capture photos, what was going on. He wanted a bear in it to represent the wildness, the wildlife part of the park.
Tell us about this bear.
This painting is personal to me because I was on the horse right after, behind that mule, and we were going into the higher peaks that are represented by this mountain here. And I realized that I'm a destination person. And so when I'm going somewhere, I'm thinking about where we're going and let's hurry up and get there. And so and I realized that when I got there, I probably wasn't going to see anything any more interesting than this rock face cliff. And so I decided to do that painting, emphasizing the rock cliff. I put the foreground in shadow, so that became less important. So I'm controlling where you look by the light. this painting is about pay attention while you're going somewhere. It's maybe the best thing you see all day.
Hey Tucker, this is Valerie.
Yes, Valerie.
We have a question on Zoom about Monty's shortcut. Did you take a photograph going down that trail, or did you do that from memory?
No, I took several photographs of that scene and put them together to compose the composition. So yeah, I did have photographs, and of course part of it is memory also. I use photographs in my work, but I don't copy photographs. I use them as reference. And it would bore me to try to copy a painting or copy a photograph. This is one of the last paintings I did before the show. It was done last year. I saw this scene on an earlier pack trip and had done a small version of it, or maybe two versions. I had emphasized on the horses in the earlier versions with this dramatic background played way down. But I always wanted to, it was so spectacular that morning. I wanted to do a painting of the landscape, but I still wanted to include the tie line. As I said before, at night, the horses are all tied up, so they aren't chasing horses in the morning. And so when I composed this, I put them at the bottom, emphasized the landscape, and I had to tie the landscape with the horses so they work together. One thing I did is I left the space between the mule and the horse here so your eye can travel through to the middle ground. Otherwise, if I'd have put a horse here, it would stop your eye. You'd have to jump over these horses to get to the middle ground. Also, as you work around the composition, as you can see, I left a space here so you can bring your eye back down to the horses and continue on. The most difficult thing to paint in that painting was this tree.
Trees are hard.
The tree, it had to look, it's a white bark pine. It had to look natural. It's right near the center of the painting, so it's going to be an important part of the painting. But I didn't want the viewer spending a whole lot of time looking at the tree. And the hardest part is making it look natural. And it has to do with the shape more than the detail. That's the most important part of a tree, is the shape.
Valerie, do you have any questions from those online?
Not yet. We already answered some.
these are field studies. When we go in the field, we take our paints. Even when we'll be 20 miles back in, we will have our paints with us. And so we can get these sketches. And as I said before, it's all about getting the information and the colors. Every one of these is, excuse me, this one actually was done in the studio. The rest, all the rest of them were done in the field.
How long does it take you to do?
It takes me way too long. But I, much over 2 hours, as you know, the light's going to change. So what you'll be painting after that will be totally different than what you started with. So basically, you've got about 2 hours. And, you know, you can wrap up some details in that after that, but the color temperature of the shadows, of course, the shadows will change, but the color temperature will change. The values will change. Especially what's difficult is when you have timber, the hillside of timber, the direction that the light is hitting makes all the difference. So, and that's one of the hard things of field studies is that you're not fighting yourself all the time.
All right, so about 11:30, we're gonna wrap up the live.
Okay, I'll just
sure, yeah.
show that painting, we're done.
All right. Just wanna make sure we get questions in, so.
And this is a Kentucky Derby painting that I just finished. And from the study that you saw in the other room.
What year?
And again, part of the challenge, I love horses. So horses aren't a problem for me to paint. 10,000 people, that's a different problem.
It's like the rocks.
We've got the twin spires of Kentucky Derby. Thank you.
Thank you.
Valerie, are there any questions from people online that we wanted to cover? You hear?
No, we're all good,
You
Tucker.
hear, Valerie?
Okay, we're all done, Valerie?
All right, thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning for the gallery talk. We're so excited to have Tucker here from Wyoming and have him captain here to talk about his paintings. We really enjoyed your talk. It was wonderful to hear you chat in the galleries and to be back together in person again. We look forward to catching up again soon online and in person. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks, Claudia. My gosh. Thanks, Tucker.